Richard Wright, Executive Director of Sheffield Chamber of Commerce. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
And Joe Rukin, Campaign Manager for the Stop HS2 Group. Right, let's hear from you, Joe. Joe, tell us your objections.
Well, basically, there's no business case, there's no environmental case, and there's no money to pay for this thing. 33 billion is a colossal amount of money, and it's the wrong transport infrastructure investment. You can deliver more benefits to more people more quickly by investing in other parts of the transport network, and of course it's a 19th century solution to a 21st century problem. We've seen that long distance travel has actually been dropping. The DfT have completely cooked the business case. They knowingly have used out-of-date figures just to try and get the figures to work. And 55% of the economic benefits are based on the cash value of time. No one works on trains, and every business user is worth £70,000 a year. It's basically a train for the rich that everyone else is not only going to have to pay for the construction of, but also have to subsidise throughout its lifetime as well.
Richard Wright, respond to that.
Well, I mean, I've seen plenty of studies that show that it's beneficial over the longer term. But I think the aspect here is it is the longer term. I mean, this is a long-term decision, and we've often criticised governments for being too short-term. At least they are taking a long one here. And the fact is, we don't know where we're going to be in 2025, 2030. What's the price of fuel going to be? What's the price of flights going to be? People are still going to want to travel, despite what anybody says. And for us here in Sheffield, it's not just about connecting to London; it's about connecting to the continent.
Joe?
Well, there's not going to be the capacity on the train paths to actually, with two lines going down south. The trains to the continent are going to be very few and far between. And you're quite right. We don't know where we're going to be in 20 years. Like 20 years ago, no one had heard of the internet or email, and look where we are now. My son, for example, I signed the release form at school for him to do video conferencing at 6, and the people like him, who will be in work in 20 years' time when this is actually ready, will not need to travel. Arup, the company that's designed almost all the plans for HS2, told its employees, do not travel for business meetings. Use video conferencing instead. And this is the thing. Will we have this need for mass intercity travel? Commuting routes.
This is interesting. Is Richard? Is he being? Is Joe a NIMBY or a visionary?
Is Joe NIMBY or a visionary? I have no idea. I think I think you have to look at what we know now. What we don't know, but we do know things will change. I think Joe's quite right when he says that.
Like many of the bunnies in your constituency, you're not a happy bunny either, are you?
I'm not. I mean, North West Leicestershire will be taking all the pain for none of the gain. We haven't got a railway station. My constituents will have all the disruption, the fear of a project that won't even start for 13 years, and have the pleasure of, if it goes through, of being able to drive half an hour north to get to London half an hour faster. There's nothing in it for North West Leicestershire at all.
What's your majority?
7,511.
OK. Do you think that'll make a difference?
I think people are going to be very upset about it. At the end of the day, there is cross-party support. This was originally a Labour policy brought in by Lord Adonis, as I understand. But I think it's badly thought out, and I have no confidence in the civil servants in Department of Transport. I mean, they delivered the Bombardier rolling stock fiasco and the West Coast mainline franchise debacle. And as far as I can see, I mean, I've got an airport in my constituency, East Midlands Airport. There's plans to have a tunnel under there, which I've spoken to the airport, and they've never been consulted about it. Also, we've got plans going in May for a 500-acre intermodal transport hub to get freight off-roads onto rail, creating 6,000 new jobs, £450 million worth of private sector investment in my constituency, and it would appear they've not been consulted, and this project could scupper that because it goes right through the middle of it.
I put the points that you made about previous Department of Transport cock-ups to Patrick McLaughlin earlier on. But also, David Cameron's made the point, this is overall going to create, according to the Prime Minister, 100,000 jobs, many of them in your constituency, no doubt.
I very much doubt it. I'm talking about a project 13 years. It won't start until the minimum 2026 after the Birmingham-London link's been completed. That's 3 general elections away, Nicky. That's 3 future governments who might decide to pull the project. Yet we're going to have the fear, the disruption, and the economic paralysis of a large tract of northwest Essex basically being sterilised for planning purposes for the next 13 years on a project which may well never happen. And it's £33 billion. We actually haven't got a railway station in northwest Essex. I'd like to reopen the Ivanhoe line to link up Colville to Leicester. And every time I ask the government for £32 million to do that, I'm told there's no money left.
You think this may well never happen?
I think there's going to be a lot of political pressure on future government policies. We're 3 generations away. 13 years is a long time. I think we could spend the money far better.
Richard Welling, do you go along with the engine for growth argument that George Osborne was talking about this morning?
No, I think George Osborne's actually making a basic economic error here, and this will actually be an engine for decline. He's neglecting the wider economic costs of the huge tax bill for HS2, the $33 billion. And it won't just be $33 billion, it'll be much more than that once all the linking infrastructure is included, and also the billions that will be spent on regeneration projects in some of these northern cities. So it's very bad news for both taxpayers and the wider economy.
What's wrong with regeneration projects?
Well, the problem is when they're funded by taxpayers and they tend just to displace poverty to other areas, as we've seen in East London. So it's usually not a good way of spending money. And the bill will be far more than $33 billion, the total bill. It could end up being roughly £2,000 per household. And this will have a deadening effect on the economy, including in the north, because, of course, northerners are taxpayers too.
And Mark, even if it is just $33 billion and that Richard's outlook that it could be a lot more than that, even if it is just $33 billion, how does that compare with other European countries where this has already happened?
Well, it's been immensely successful, and one of the key towns to benefit from having high speed is Lille. There were towns in northern France that fought, much like people round here in Buckinghamshire fought to keep the high speed away. And the mayor of Lille fought to get the high-speed rail not only going near Lille, but slap bang through the middle. And Lille, of course, was a coal mining town in huge decline, huge unemployment. Thanks to the high-speed rail coming through, it finds itself at the crossroads of Europe. It's got businesses moving there because they can be in London in an hour and a half, Brussels in an hour, Paris in an hour. And people actually go there for short breaks. They do more for it, almost as good as Brussels. So the high-speed rail has certainly improved Lille. So I don't see any reason why it can't do the same sort of thing for some of the towns in Britain.
And Dr. Richard Welling, do you have a problem that it's London to all the time? It's London to Manchester, Manchester to London, London to Leeds, Leeds to London, that it's not about the northern cities between themselves having better transport links?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And really the main problem in the north, well, there are 2 main problems. One is very poor road links across the Pennines, particularly between Sheffield and Manchester, and also congestion and capacity on the M6 between the Midlands and the northwest. And this will do very little to alleviate those problems. And these problems could be solved at much lower cost, and the benefits will be much greater. I mean, a lot of it could even be privately funded without actually tapping the taxpayer.
Would the benefits definitely be much greater? I mean, do we know about the weight of trade and business going on between those cities as compared to those cities and London?
Yeah, we know that on a comparison with other transport projects, the benefit cost ratio of high speed 2 is extremely low, and that's even when they've included all these flawed assumptions like business travellers not being able to work on the train and so on. So usually these kind of projects with such low returns will be kicked out of touch by the Treasury, but obviously this is a highly political project. That's why we could describe it as a vanity project. And instead of going for the high return, low cost, smaller schemes that don't have all the sort of Hertz power attached to it, they'll go for the glory with high speed 2, a huge uneconomic project.
Mark, your response to that, Mark Smith?
Isn't vanity sort of taking care of yourself and not letting yourself go? Perhaps we ought to be a bit more vain in Britain and actually invest in our infrastructure. All we can, we're not. This isn't the Stockton and Darlington. We're not the first people to try this, uncertain of its effect. You only have to look across the Channel at what's happened in France, Spain, Italy, even Turkey now has high-speed rail, and it's been, as I say, it's been immensely successful. And that's the proof. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. At changing people's travel habits, getting people out of airliners, out of cars, linking the towns and cities within a country, and promoting economic growth.
And Dr. Richard Welling, if we're looking for big infrastructure projects, as some members of the coalition government seem to be, were more than hinting, This is a pretty good example of one, isn't it?
Well, of course, it's not going to help growth in the short term, which is what's desperately needed, because the relatively small benefits that do come won't come for another 20 years, at least to the north. I mean, looking over at France, of course, taxpayers are subsidising the railways over there to a huge extent, more than they are here, and the same is true in Germany and Italy. Mark's unfortunately making the same error as the government of ignoring the wider costs to the general economy of the tax bill in these countries and just focusing on a few localised benefits in cities such as Lille.
And if this isn't rocket fuel to the wider economy and to the great cities, which are, if not in decline, then certainly in a bit of trouble economically, what is?
Well, I think the key for the North is really what's key for the rest of the UK economy, which is deregulation, tax cuts and so on. I mean, we've had a long history of flawed regional policy for the last 60 years, and none of it's really worked. So tens of billions have been pumped into various cities such as Liverpool, but the decline's carried on, and it's really because these cities are based on 18th and 19th century economic geography, not 21st century.
Well, explain that a bit more.
Well, for example, the reasons why these cities developed were based on trade patterns in the 18th and 19th century and where the coalfields were and where the water power was. And these reasons for these cities to be located in the north have now disappeared. So really, this isn't going to do anything about the fundamental problems and with northern economies.
Although those regenerating Liverpool and the port around Merseyside would say that port is as busy as it ever was. It's just differently busy. Well,
of course, it employs far fewer people, but in terms of tonnage, it is doing well, though that's going to decline markedly once coal stops being used in our power stations. But a lot of the regeneration recently is just a facade, though. And if you look at the northwest, around 2/3 of the economy is actually public spending. So there's very little real wealth generation going on up there.
Mark Smith, your argument seems to be based not solely, but very heavily on just connecting cities, connecting people. Doesn't the regeneration of some of our biggest cities and city regions involve more than just connecting people?
Well, it probably does. And Lille, for example, was part of a package of measures that were enabled by the high-speed rail. It wasn't high-speed rail alone, but it was the coming together of all sorts of policies. But there's no doubt from what I see, I mean, I'm not an economist, I'm a traveller. And when I see countries being effectively joined by an effective transport system, they appear to be economically stronger than countries with degenerating infrastructure.
Let me read this text. Once again, the northeast of England loses out. Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough still not connected to the motorway network, and now the area of the country with one of the highest rates of unemployment is left further behind the rest of the country. Why would major businesses relocate to the northeast rather than Leeds or Manchester, both of which are thriving as it is, says this text. Your thoughts on that, Dr. Richard Welling?
Well, I think it's wrong to say that Leeds and Manchester are thriving in any real sense. So the public sector dominates the economy in these cities. For example, we've seen the BBC and HMRC move into Salford and being major employers up there. Also, a lot of the other jobs in Leeds, for example, are basically non-jobs based on government regulation. So there's very little wealth creation going on. It's mostly a facade, and we'll see more of this when HS2 opens, with huge regional development grants going in.
And you're not convinced that a greater connectedness to London for those cities, including Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, would necessarily lead to wealth creation? Because there are plenty of people who'd argue that that's exactly what it will do.
Well, look at Doncaster. That's had a very fast link to London for decades now, and it remains one of the poorest towns in the UK. If you compare its poverty statistics with neighbouring boroughs without the rail link, they're very similar indeed. So it's definitely no panacea.
They have the same controversy here in France that they have in Britain, because that line going down to Bordeaux, they want to extend it to Toulouse and then onto the Spanish border. And it's one of 10, well, it's 10 out of 14 of the high-speed lines that they can over the next year. The budget minister has said they're not financially viable. They want more money for the main network, and he's really citing there a report from the French Audit Office who said really their socio-economic environmental interests had not been established. What's harder to quantify, of course, is what business it does generate, but the auditor says 30% of the existing high-speed lines in France, as popular as they are and as much as they are pointed to by people in the UK, they run at a loss.
The key question is whether or not, in economic terms, this really all makes sense. It's a huge amount of money. Professor John Tomini from the School of Planning, University College London. What do you reckon? Does it make sense economically?
Well, I think some of the claims which are being made about this investment really don't stand up to scrutiny. Yesterday, I think Nick Clegg said it would heal the north-south divide, and I think there's a lot of reasons to be sceptical about that sort of claim.
You think it might actually, some people suggest that this kind of link actually helps the capital city even more?
I think there's a lot of international evidence to suggest that. If we look at countries like France, like Spain, like South Korea, which have introduced high-speed lines along the lines that have been proposed for the UK, what we find is that most of the benefits of those investments accrue to the capital cities. Why? Because essentially what happens is the capital city extends the size of its labour market. You know, in Britain, Birmingham will become part of the London labour market.
It'd be a conurbation almost. Like
all right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then secondly, because what's happened in places like France is that nationally headquartered firms have tended to close their local offices because they can serve their markets from the capital city.
Yeah, but what about the general economic benefit of having fast links? I mean, does it just make the economy behave better? Is there any evidence on that or not?
There's not a great deal of evidence to suggest that introducing high-speed lines, although they do cut journey times obviously quite significantly, there's no evidence to suggest that that has a major impact on regional economic performance in the way that the government is currently claiming. Right. We studied all of the evidence from around the world on this, and it's very, very difficult to find any evidence to support that claim.
Right, but links do. I mean, you know, if you've got a part of the country where you can't get any railway line, you can't get decent roads, they're not going to get economic development. So you do need links, don't you?
Connectivity is very important. But the evidence that reducing journey times in the way that's proposed will have these major impacts on the north-south divide, as is being claimed, that evidence doesn't exist. We will certainly see development around the stations in Leeds and Manchester, but some of that development will probably occur at the expense of other northern cities. Where you'll get an effectively a kind of regional concentration of activity.
Right. Chris Stokes, what's the problem as far as these local authorities are concerned?
Well, I think two things, really. Firstly, all the academic work, you actually had Professor Tominey in your news bulletin, suggests that HS2 won't reduce the north-south divide. High-speed rail lines have generally benefit capital cities, not the regions. And indeed, Spain is the European country with the largest high-speed network, and Spain is the European country with the worst unemployment and very bad debt. So
there's not necessarily a link between the two. But I mean, this evidence of a capital city benefiting, you think why? Because because people from let's say Birmingham would start commuting into London. You think that's what would happen?
Oh yes, Birmingham potentially becomes just another dormitory town for London, which isn't really tackling the north-south divide. It's making it worse. As
a country, don't we need a fast, efficient rail network, not just to Manchester and Leeds, but in the end spreading right the way across the country? Well,
we have from London a fast, efficient rail network.
Well, what do we need? One going across, you're saying, instead, something not London-based.
You know, there are plenty of improvements that could be made. To give you an example, there's a station at Toton Sidings, which is the station for East Midlands proposed. There's a station at Meadowhall Shopping Centre, which is the station for Sheffield. That's not going to link Sheffield and Nottingham and Derby because you've got to get to those stations, which are miles out of town. There are already 2 trains an hour between Sheffield and Nottingham. Spend some money and get those journey times down in the next 5 to 10 years at much less cost with a much quicker result. HS2 in the north produces no benefits for 20 years.
We can speak to one of those affected. Andrew Mason is chair of Church Fenton Parish Council in North Yorkshire, which is on the new High Speed 2 route. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Tony. How are you this evening?
I'm all right, Andrew. How's your village affected by this?
Massively, really. It's just going to basically blight the countryside. But just one thing. Your news clip, you refer to your lead on it being generous compensation. What this is actually going to do is blight thousands of people's lives, and the question's got to be asked for what? Because where our village is, we could get to London, it'd only take an extra 21 minutes, but the spur as it's going to come into York is going to cause havoc among, countless thousands of people, footpaths, bridleways, where can we have a picnic, and what's it all for? Really, the cost for future generations is going to be massive.
Well, talking of future generations, Andrew, you've probably seen all the arguments today, but they talk about that, George Osborne, for example, talks about our predecessors who built the Victorian Railway and the motorways that were built mid-20th century. If people hadn't had the foresight to do that, then we wouldn't be benefiting. He's saying there's kind of a greater good here, and let's be honest, the route goes through his constituency, and he says, let's look forward.
Yeah, I'm sure you can make that argument, and those people will be making that argument time after time after time. But the real blight is how it's going to affect people's lives. You can't put a compensation figure on that. You can't say that, well, we'll give you X amount of pounds. It's not about that. It's about the way we value the countryside. It's about the democratisation of the countryside. It's about what we cherish. It's about what we believe. What is the quintessential point of England's green and pleasant land? So it's that ability to roam.
What's your main gripe then, Andrew? Is it the fact that it may go through Greenbelt, may go through countryside, or it may go through built-up areas? Yeah,
it's going to blight the countryside. It's going to spoil a way of life. It's going to prejudice green open spaces. It's going to be noise pollution, high viaducts sweeping through the countryside. It's going to be absolutely a disaster. Okay. And for what? So that we can get to London 21 minutes faster. Is that a price worth paying? I don't think so.
Well, they say it's going to bring billions in investment north, Andrew.
Why would a business relocate further north for the sake of 21 minutes? No business would do that. You've got to take the consequences of the lifestyle change that this will affect thousands. And trying to say that, well, we'll put a few tunnels in. In our village, it's going to be 50 foot high, and there's going to be over 1 kilometre of high viaduct that is going to blight this countryside for miles around. Who has got the right to sacrifice our way of life? Well, I don't think in a democratic process we can actually make that claim. Nobody has got that right. It's about rural open space. It's about amenity.
Andrew, what about if I put this to you? Now, I say this with the caveat that it's not going through my back garden, so I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
You and those around you will be gone in a generation's time, pardon the expression, but you will be.
I agree.
But this rail line will be here and maybe giving benefit for future generations to come. So one generation's sacrifice may benefit the many. Does that hold any water?
No, because I think you've got to look at it as a lifestyle cost. You've got to look at it in terms of not this generation, but for generations to come. That loss of amenity for my children and my children's children is gone forever if we allow this. When are we going to wake up? When are we going to realise that we cannot continually urbanise our rural environment? When is enough enough?
OK, Les is on the line from Cambridge. Hello, Les.
Yeah, hi, Tony.
Hiya. Go on, Les, what's your point?
My point is, are we missing something here? Because go back to 1973. What was your knowledge of computers and the thought of having I'll use the brand of iPad in front of you tonight? Would you have believed it?
No.
And my point is, in 30 years' time, I'm told that technology is getting, the developments are getting quicker and quicker and quicker. Will somebody in Leeds need to travel to London in 30 years' time to work?
Super point.
Well, is it? Is it? I mean, Les, it's a valid point, but what are you suggesting? Time travel? I mean, what are you suggesting?
No, I'm just saying, Tony, computerisation, super fast broadband. I mean, I watched a YouTube clip last night of a dead rapper with a hologram on a stage. Now you would think that was impossible, but there he was performing in front, and he's not with us anymore. So the fact you could be in Leeds and work in London shouldn't be too much of a remote possibility, should it?
Adam Thomas joins us now. Adam lives in Buckinghamshire, and HS2 will pass right by his house. Hello, Adam.
Hello.
Hi. Adam, how's this going to affect you?
It's totally going to devastate mine and my family's life. I'm a full-time wheelchair user, and I spent a long time living in a one-bedroom council flat with my wife, saving money to buy a property that I could be independent in, which we managed to do that 12 years ago. We bought 4 walls and a roof with nothing inside, and we spent the next 12 years saving money, not going on holiday, not having flash cars, not paying pensions or anything else, both of us working very hard to be able to make it our dream home. The line goes we are 4 metres outside the 120 metre zone.
Right.
And because we're 4 metres outside, we don't get a penny compensation. Not a penny.
What would you have got? Has it been made clear what you would have got, Adam?
If we were inside the compulsory purchase zone, we would have had our property bought, and we would have had housing costs met, moving costs met,
Okay.
And plus compensation of up to, I think, 10% up to the value of 47,000.
So if you're just 4 metres outside that zone, presumably all the properties in that zone are going to be bought and demolished, and yours will be right on the edge then?
Yes.
Of the track?
That's right. And we are going to be 64 metres away from the side of the track. One of my lungs doesn't work properly, so how I'm going to deal with the dust and the chaos, I really don't know. It has absolutely devastated our lives. But the fact that we have written to 4 of the ministers now asking to have our case looked into, and not one of them even bothering to reply to any of our letters. We've asked for Freedom from Information Acts on disability impact assessments, which they haven't replied to. Then they just refuse to talk to us. Basically, we have been told by HS2 that there's actually nothing we can do.
Adam, stay there because I want to bring you in with Anthony now. Anthony, George Osborne today says, it's all for the greater good, etc. We must all make sacrifices. But right along this route, there are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of stories like Adam. You've said, local populations have argued successfully for tunnels, etc. What hope can you offer Adam?
Well, an individual case like Adam's, it is you can't help but feel very, very sorry for that situation. And I think the situation, the system is set up where they draw lines in the sand and say, well, outside that there won't be any compensation. There will be compensation. Within that there is always a certain amount of flexibility. And I would just encourage Adam to continue to make the case to High Speed 2 that he has got a genuine case for compensation, because we're dealing with something which is, yes, as a system, but within that system there are always people who are willing to listen, and I genuinely think that along the line of the route, they have got in place a huge amount of local consultation going on, where they are listening to precisely that kind of discussion.
All right, Adam,
and acting where appropriate.
This is the whole point. They're pretending to listen, but they're not listening, and they're not doing anything. Our MP, Cheryl Gillam, actually organised 3 of the head people from HS2 to come and see us. And the reason why they came is because Cheryl Gillam, because we couldn't get an answer from the minister, wrote on our behalf to the minister, who the minister, Justin Greening, turned around and said it's nothing to do with her, it's an HS2 matter. HS2 organised a meeting to come to our house and sat in on my sofa and said that it's nothing to do with HS2, it's a government matter. So they're both passing the buck.
All right, Adam, let's...
And just one last point on
quickly.
Compensation. The whole issue with disabled person, if our neighbours had to move, they could move into another property tomorrow. OK, it might not be set up perfectly for them, but with me, I can't. I can't just move into another property tomorrow because I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I have to have accessible bathrooms, I have to have accessible kitchens, I have to have doorways widened, I have to have electric points moved, I have to have lamps put in.
All right.
All this costs a lot of money.
It does, Adam. You've perfectly illustrated the human interest in all this, the human stories along the route.
HS2, when it was announced 3 years ago, next month, it was going through our garden completely, and we've spent much time, as your last caller said, in meetings with all levels of staff of HS2 who will just look you in the eyes and say, yes, your garden will be used as a construction site. Yes, you will have diggers and things. We'll just put a wall up in your garden and your children won't be able to use their own garden for their whole childhood of about 7 to 8 years that will be left. And then when we've finished, we'll just leave the wall there, or we might move it back a bit, and then we'll give you some money for the bit of your garden they've taken. So we've had those same conversations of complete disinterest when you've got a really modest, small garden. We've all just been labelled NIMBYs and selfish southerners that don't want anyone up north to have a job. And, it's a complete lie, of course. But we did actually win the tunnel that you've referred to a couple of times, which was quite bizarre because we never asked for a tunnel. All we've ever said is stop HS2 because the whole thing is so flawed.
So how do you feel that it's now going to come by in a tunnel rather than on the surface?
In sort of emotionally, as just as a human being, and particularly as a mum of 2 small children who's still in primary school, the sense of relief for them that they are not going to have to live through this hell that we had for 2 years, You know, you can't imagine the pressure on a family where you're paying a mortgage for a house that is worthless, and looking at your darling children and knowing that they don't have any idea of what's about to happen to you. So when they announced the tunnel last year, it was a real shock to us, because we purposely never asked for mitigation. We just said, stop HS2, it's a joke. So we were obviously delighted on a personal level, but actually it's motivated our group to fight harder for other people, because we not only have empathy and sympathy and compassion, which a lot of pro-HS2 people lack completely, for anybody who's affected by it in any way, be it a business, a family, a home, and so on. But more, you know, we also know all the details. We've spent 3 years researching it, meeting with them, and once you know how much it doesn't stack up, whether it's environmentally, capacity, design, route, it doesn't matter what angle you're coming from, it doesn't add up.
All
you cannot support it in any way unless you're really a vested interest or a business that doesn't want to spend any money but wants it free to somewhere near your location.
Joe's on the line from Warwickshire. Hello, Joe.
Evening, Tony.
Hiya. What do you make of HS2 and the announcements today?
Oh, well, the whole thing's a complete disaster. It's a total farce. The DfT have cooked the figures from the start, and the government know it. They've used every outdated model they can. They've used, you know, forecasting models which, if you put the 2008 passenger figures in and try and predict this year, it's 40% over. And that's what they've put in. They're saying that you spend £1, you get £2 back. Half of that, 55% of that, you were not going to believe this. You know, you're talking about stories on trains. Right, no one on trains works. No one ever uses a laptop or even a pen and a bit of paper on a train.
Oh, I've seen loads of people work on a train, Joe.
Well, you should tell that to the Department for Transport, because they don't think so. They say that all time on trains is wasted. No one ever works on trains. And therefore, and this is...
That's why I've got to get there quicker.
Billions of economic benefits. Over half of them come from this. The idea, no one works on trains, so therefore you go faster. There is a cash value on that time saving. They base that on the idea that everyone on the all the business users on the train are worth 70 grand a year, and then you multiply it by a grossly inflated passenger forecast, as I've just said, and that's how you get those benefits.
But even if
the
you...
best one is...
Oh, hang on, Joe. Even if...
The best one is, of course, if your journey's shorter, you know, you're going into London now from, say, the Solihull stockbroker belt, going in from, you know, Birmingham International, you're probably getting up at 6 in the morning. If your journey's half an hour less, what do you reckon you're going to do, Tony? You reckon you're still going to get up at 6 and get to the office half an hour early for no reason?
There are a lot of ifs, buts and maybes. There are a lot of ifs, buts and maybes, Joe, surrounding this. But what is for definite is that cities like Leeds, Manchester and Sheffield, the leaders of those cities have absolutely welcomed this news with open arms. Manchester, for example, says, for a start off, it's going to create 30,000 jobs.
Yeah, I'll tell you something. That's the other thing, that these jobs figures that you're getting have been made up by the people who were lobbying for this in the first place. They're also the people who are saying, oh, the HS2 could have massive carbon savings if you do a load of other work and bring in road pricing as well. And there was something else specifically that I actually rang up about, because...
Go on quickly, Joe, because I've got the calls.
On the news for the last 6 hours or so, what's been trailed, top of the news, is there will be a generous compensation package. We've had the exceptional hardship scheme running for 2.5 years now. 16% of the people who've applied for it have actually been paid out.
All right, Joe, listen, you're a coordinator for Stop HS2. What is your vested interest in this? Just explain. Do you live near the line, or you just feel very strongly about it?
The line's going past Kenilworth, but I live as far away from HS2 as you can in Kenilworth. I live completely on the other side. No, I saw, you know, the announcement trail back in March 2010, and like a lot of people, I thought high-speed rail. Yeah, that sounds like it's probably a good idea. And then I made the mistake of reading the document.
Okay.
And it's an absolute disaster. The whole case has been cut. As you were saying, they're saying, we'll breach the north-south divide. Every economist, every academic you speak to say, no, it's completely the other way round.